I had never been one for social media. A decade-old habit, I suppose, but it made me an easy target for Craigslist. I had been laid off and was scrambling to find a part-time gig to tide me over. The odd jobs section seemed harmless enough, so when I came across a listing for a yard work helper in a quaint suburban neighborhood, I felt a sliver of hope. The job seemed ideal. $200 for a few hours of work. The address was in a neighborhood I had driven through 1,000,000 times, but never really explored. I replied, and within an hour, I got a response from a man named John. The tone was overly casual, almost too friendly, but I was desperate. "Great," John said in his email. "I'll be expecting you at 2 p.m. My place is at 1453 Sycamore Drive. Don't worry about bringing anything. Just come on over." At 1:45 p.m., I found myself parked in front of an old Victorian house, its paint chipped and its garden overgrown. I hesitated for a moment before knocking. John opened the door almost immediately. He was an unassuming middle-aged man, his hair slightly disheveled, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. "Hey, thanks for coming," John said with a smile. "Come on in. Let's get started." Inside, the house was a labyrinth of clutter. Stacks of old newspapers, half-empty boxes of books, and strange trinkets filled every available space. John led me through a narrow hallway to the backyard. It was an overgrown jungle of weeds and twisted vines. "Here's the deal," John said, handing me a rake. "Just clear this area. I'll be around inside if you need anything." As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the oppressive stillness of the backyard. I was about halfway through when I heard the back door creak open. John came out, holding a glass of iced tea. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said. "You're doing great." "Thanks," I replied, taking the glass. It tasted strange, but I chalked it up to the heat. I resumed raking, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease. Hours passed. Sweat dripped down my face, and my arms ached. I could see the finish line. The yard was starting to look presentable. Just as I was about to wrap up, I heard John's voice from the back door, sounding oddly distant. "Hey, do you mind taking a quick break? I need to show you something." Something in his tone made me pause. I walked back to the house, and as I neared the door, I noticed that it was ajar. The interior was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls. John stood in the doorway, holding a lantern. "Just this way," he said, gesturing for me to follow. I followed him through a narrow hallway, my unease growing. We reached a small door at the end of the hall. John opened it, revealing a dark, musty room. I peered inside, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. "And then I need you to help me with something in here," John said. Before I could respond, he suddenly lunged at me. I stumbled backward, but he was surprisingly strong. I tried to fend him off, but he grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the room. The door slammed shut behind us. In the dim light of the lantern, I saw the room was lined with photographs, hundreds of them. Faces of people I didn't recognize, all with one thing in common. Their eyes were wide with terror. My heart pounded as I realized what I was looking at. Each photo had a date scrawled beneath it. John's hand gripped my shoulder. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said, his voice a sinister whisper. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Panic surged through me. I tried to wrestle free, but he was too strong. He began to pull out a knife, its blade gleaming in the lantern's light. Just then, there was a loud crash from the other side of the house. John froze, his expression shifting from focus to confusion. I saw my chance. I kicked him as hard as I could, and he staggered back, dropping the knife. I bolted for the door, my heart racing. I threw it open and ran through the house. the sound of John's angry shouts echoing behind me. I burst through the front door and sprinted to my car. I didn't look back until I was safely driving away. I never went to the police. I couldn't shake the fear that John might come after me. Or worse, that he might already know who I was. A year passed. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and tried to put the nightmare behind me. One night, while browsing Craigslist out of habit, I saw a new listing in the odd jobs section. The address was for a neighborhood I recognized all too well, Sycamore Drive. The name on the listing was different, but something about it seemed off. I clicked on the listing. The description was eerily familiar, but the final line made my blood run cold. Looking for someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty. I closed my laptop, shivering. I knew John was still out there, somewhere, and he was still looking for his next victim.